You're welcome to the Policy Council. My name is Okwemi Agbaje. In this edition, I start my Policy 101 series. That's a series in which I will address topical issues, fundamental issues, important socio-economic and political issues involving policy, significant policy issues, and in which I will articulate for the benefit of listeners and policymakers my understanding of those phenomena and proffer solutions. On this initial edition of the Policy 101 series, I answer the question, or I ask the questions. Why are Nigerians poor? We undertake a fundamental diagnosis of Nigerian poverty, the structural causes, the economic causes, the socio-political causes, and we proffer our solutions. Enjoy the program. The hypothesis behind my topic for today is that Nigerians are poor. Is that a controversial statement? Well, if you look at the Nigerian data, in 1980 we had poverty at 27.2%. By 85 it was 46.3%. By 2000, poverty in Nigeria had risen to 80.9%. Thankfully, it declined a little bit with the advent of democracy, down to 54% by 2005. But it has risen again, and by the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics data, we have poverty at 71.5% today. So when I say why Nigerians are poor, it is not a controversial statement. Unemployment has also grown. It was just 6.4% in 1980. Today, 27.4% of Nigeria's employable population is unemployed. Literacy, that is where we have not done too terribly, even though the quality of education is debatable. But the literacy rate today, as of 2011, is 72.9%. But there are still almost 30% of Nigerians who are completely illiterate. Human development, 2012, 0.471. What does that mean? Nigeria has low human development. Any country below 0.5 has failed. It's classified as low human development. And what of life expectancy? Life expectancy for the average Nigerian is 52 years, 52.3 years. So democracy, the economy, is not working for Nigerians. And there's no other evidence of that GDP has risen in the same period. So Nigerians have gotten poorer, not because the economy has not grown. The GDP data shows that the economy has grown, but Nigerians have gotten better. So there's something wrong with the structure of our economy. The objective of this discussion is to examine what it is that is wrong with our economic structure. So let's look first at the structure of our gross domestic product, otherwise called GDP. If you look at the slide I'm showing, it shows that our petroleum sector, this is as of 2012, contributes almost 14% of GDP. Agriculture, almost 40% of GDP. Wholesale and retail trade, 19.92. Finance and insurance, just about 3.37. Manufacturing is down to 4.2. Telecoms, 7%. Real estate, less than 2%. Building and construction, 2%. Solid minerals, less than 1%. And hotel and restaurants, less than 1%. What insights would you observe from looking at this? First, only 3 sectors make up 73% of Nigeria's GDP. If you add up oil and gas at 13.76, agriculture at 39.21, and wholesale and retail trade at 19.92, you have 73% of GDP. So when we talk about the Nigerian economy, we are really talking about these 3 sectors. So when we say GDP grew at 8% or 7%, it's really these 3 sectors that grew at 8%. Maybe plus telecoms. What does that tell us? Looking at the structure of those three sectors. Crude, petroleum, and gas. It's crude, petroleum, and gas. There is limited domestic refining. We all know that. We do not leverage our petrochemical resources, at least not optimally. We optimize the vast gas resources we have. And the industry is just crude, extraction, and export. There are no domestic linkages. Agriculture is not modern. Thankfully, we have policy moving towards modernizing agriculture, dealing with the value chain issues, and I commend the Minister of Agriculture for that. But it's still vastly low, smallholder farming, submodern, dependent on rainfall. And wholesale and retail trade is mostly in imported goods. And there's very limited domestic value addition. In short, all those three sectors that account for 73% of GDP do not employ Nigerians, do not redress poverty, do not have massive impact across the population. Let's take those insights and reflect on them for a minute. For Nigerian poverty to be dealt with, for unemployment to be redressed, that structure needs to change. I'll be right back.
My name is Femi Durojayi. Welcome to the New Lagos, where things are improving every day. I work on the island and live on the mainland. But that's no longer a problem. With improved roads, I get to work faster. Sometimes I even leave my car and use the BRT bus, which is comfortable, fast, efficient, and reliable. After a hard day's work, the nights and evenings are even more fun. The streets are better lit, and the city is more secure. So I can catch my phone in peace. I pay my taxes because I want to continue enjoying the good things a big modern city like our Lagos brings. So it's my taxes that makes them real. Have you paid your tax?
Pay your tax. It's your civic responsibility. It's your duty. It's the law.
I've looked at the structure of GDP. But what of the growth rates of the sectors within the economy? You would notice from the graph I'm showing that the telecom sector is growing at almost 32%. It has done so since 2001. It's in a class of its own. And we have a lesson there about the advantages of deregulation, of private sector investment, and of private sector management, coupled with government taking control of regulation and consumer protection. So telecoms is in a class of its own, and we know why. Our challenge is to create more sectors like the telecom sector that grow at a fast rate and that are susceptible to employing people. Unfortunately, telecoms does not employ many people, even though it has significant value added across the economy in terms of spin-offs. If we look at the rest of our sectors, however, the growth rates are totally different. The insight you would discover is that the high growth sectors are mostly low employing. The sectors with potentials for huge employment, manufacturing, solid minerals, agriculture, building and construction, petroleum and natural gas, if we include domestic refining and transportation, are not growing fast enough. If these sectors were growing like telecoms and employing people as they could, Nigeria will not have an employment problem. Let's move on to the structure of the budget. And I think most Nigerians today are familiar with that issue. In 2011, capital expenditure was only 25% of the budget. In 2012, thankfully, we've begun to redress that. And capital expenditure increased to 28.53% of spending. In 2013, the figure is even better, 32.53% of the budget. A country that spends even just 32% of its budget on investing in capital infrastructure and capital goods like schools and buildings and infrastructure will not develop. The phenomenon that we've just seen at the federal level is replicated in the states. It is capital expenditure that builds schools and hospitals, that develops transport and infrastructure, that provides social and municipal services, that equips our police forces and security agencies. And then there's the problem of value for money. So when you see these figures in the budget, it is the maximum possible allocation, subject to deductions for corruption and other leakages. If we must improve the capacity of our economy and its people, we must increase or indeed invert the ratio of capital spending in our budget to 60% to 40% recurrent. How we'll do that will take time, but we must do that. The other point is that the public sector dominates the commanding heights of our economy. We've moved away somewhat. Some sectors have been privatized, and happily, power is one of those that is about to go. But the vast oil and gas sector still needs to undergo the same restructuring. The airports, the refineries, still need to become private sector activities. The private sector is better at creating jobs and prosperity than government. Government, of course, has a role in creating the enabling environment and in providing regulation and providing the right investment climate, but the private sector is the one that generates capital and that manages effectively. The telecom sector is the best example of what we can achieve with economic transformation using private sector capital and management. There's a final factor I want to highlight in relation to the structure of the economy, and that's the structure of the financial sector. In particular, the absence of a mortgage market and a mortgage sector. I know policy is addressing that, but what that has done is deny the vast majority of Nigerians of housing and of title with which they could create wealth. It also means the absence of long-term funds and therefore a short cycle for our financial system. It's also a factor because of the high interest rates and, of course, the absence of a secondary market for mortgages. Our policy is again moving in the right direction in relation to that, with discussions around the creation of a secondary mortgage market and a mortgage refinancing corporation. But the other issues of access to finance remain, particularly for small and medium enterprises and in relation to consumer credit. We'll be right back.
My name is Onye Mike Nzago. I live in Lagos where things are getting better every day.
Our school has just been renovated.
And they give us free notebooks too. Going to school is easier and safer for students like me because I can cross the highway using the footbridge. And I use the BRT bus, which is fast, convenient and free for students like me. I enjoy looking at the beautiful streets on my way to school. And the many street signs tell me where exactly I am. When I get to Basic 12, the government will pay the fees for my GCE and NECO examinations. I am happy. My mom and dad says all these good things are happening because they pay their taxes. I hope to pay my taxes when I grow up and start working. Have you paid your tax?
Pay your tax. It's your civic responsibility. It's your duty. It's the law.
We've looked at the economic structure. We've looked at issues around the financial sector, GDP and all of that. But there are political factors that matter as well in terms of the political structure. And one important implication of that is the cost of governance. We've had a long debate about the costs of maintaining our National Assembly. And even though I don't agree with some of the figures bandied around, these are the real figures. The National Assembly's budget has increased by over 2,060% between 1999 and 2013. Currently, 150 billion goes to the National Assembly every year. It started with just 7 billion in 1999. It increased to 9 to 19 to 21 billion. But today, the same institution receives 150 billion of our resources. And then there's low industrialization. Look at power supply. Again, policy is moving in the right direction in terms of liberalizing that market, unbundling it and handing it over to the private sector. But Nigeria's 4,000 megawatts power supply and even our Vision 2020 target of 40,000 megawatts is just South Africa's current power generation. We cannot compete and we cannot feed our people. We cannot build the industries to create jobs for our people except we deal with this gross power deficit. And then there's transport and infrastructure, there's money, credit and finance, particularly high interest rates. There's the failure of government services, particularly security, water, postal, ports, immigration and customs. The high tax burden on Nigerian businesses and individuals. The incidence of regulatory overkill, very low industry incentives for people who want to build businesses and produce, and an investment climate that still remains substantially hostile to businesses. And then there's corruption. What corruption does is deny resources that should have built a hospital and puts it in private hands. It denies resources that should have built a good school and puts it in private hands. It denies resources that would have repaired a refinery and put it in private hands. We cannot prove how much has gone into corruption in Nigeria. But the long-term trend of rising oil prices and the information we have about how much Nigeria has earned in terms of national oil revenue tells us that something perhaps is not quite right. Between 1999 and the second quarter of 2013, 60 trillion naira, $380 billion has been earned from oil. In that period, the federal government has spent 35.2 trillion naira, $220 billion. The states and the federal capital have spent 25.4 trillion naira. That's $158.8 billion. The local governments have spent 10 trillion naira. That's $65.9 billion. Overall, all the three tiers of government in Nigeria have spent 71 trillion naira. Over $440 billion between 1999 and today. The question is, do we feel we have sufficient value for that expenditure as a nation in terms of social services and in terms of infrastructure? I think most Nigerians will say probably not. We must now focus on people. There are things that have gone wrong in terms of the social sector, in terms of education. We have not placed sufficient attention on the quality of education, on skills and competencies, on science and technology, on economics, management and entrepreneurship, on innovation and creativity, and on the adult education and technical education. So our people lack the skills and the attitudes required to prosper in a modern economy. We still have a need for sustainable health financing. And there are no social systems in terms of unemployment, in terms of disability, care of senior citizens, and rural development. And then we've had significant policy failures. Since 1970, we have not leveraged the oil and gas resources to create a robust, diversified economy. We've not created a successful industrial policy. We have not modernized agriculture. And perhaps we have sustained a almost deliberate neglect of human capital, education, health, mass transportation, and mass housing. To make the economy work for the poor, we must diversify this economy. Manufacturing, transportation, mines and minerals, agriculture, and construction must become viable economic sectors. We must still carry out some further economic reforms. The budgetary reforms, the spending reforms. Now we've executed the power sector roadmap. I like that. But we must privatize the refineries, concession the airports, and leverage transparent public-private partnerships. Transparent ones, whenever possible. We must build a mining sector. We have the legal infrastructure to do that. But we now must find the political will to do it. We must create strong regulatory institutions. And we must enact a competition law and policy. In the political realm, we need fiscal federalism. We must devolve power to states and local governments. The revenue allocation must follow that devolution. And we must reduce the cost of governance. We need further policy actions in terms of improving the investment climate, in terms of focusing on the needs of small and medium enterprises, in terms of further reforms of pensions, insurance, and sovereign savings, in terms of land reform and administration, and of course, in terms of policy towards lower inflation, lower business operating costs, and lower interest rates. Finally, there must be aggressive social policy. It must be clear that the role of government is to help the poor and the vulnerable. We must reform public education, and we must create a sustainable model for service in the health sector and for financing the health needs of our population. Finally, given the gravity of the unemployment problem, we must create a temporary chain, a temporary social network in terms of unemployment support. If we do all this and we do not tackle corruption, we would still have failed. We must take structural approaches to corruption, privatization, public-private partnerships, procurement transparency, freedom of information, all of that, and then there must be enforcement. Otherwise, the resources meant to improve the lives of Nigerians will continue to improve the lives of a few. I hope the ideas presented in this short discussion will be useful to most Nigerians and to our policymakers. Making the economy work for the majority involves structural, policy, and governance reforms. Critical is to diversify the economic base and to create jobs for our people. We must build human capital. We must build infrastructure. And we must tackle corruption. Doing some of these will not solve the problem. We must do all of them simultaneously. So that finally, the potentials of our economy can be felt by all Nigerians. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.